Well, hello, I'm Dr. Judy Matthews. I'm going to talk to you today about design thinking. This is very much the introduction to your online course, where there'll be 5 different modules. But today we're going to do very much the introduction. I'll tell you a bit about the whole picture, what we're doing, how my end fits in, and then we'll go forward from there. So as we begin, I'll share my screen so you have some idea of what I'm really talking about. Okay. So here, as you can see, HEAL, this is the Health Excellence Acceleration Lab. It's a collaboration between the QUT Design Lab and Clinical Excellence Queensland. And we've been very fortunate to work with the Clinical Excellence Queensland program to develop some of these applications of design thinking. As I mentioned, my name's Dr. Judy Matthews. I'm one of the team who put together this very interesting online course. And we're wanting to talk you through each different module and then, in fact, hoping to see you go on the journey where you use design thinking. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the First Nations owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Turrbal and the Yuggera people. These are owners of the land on which QUT now stands. And in fact, we love to pay our respect to their elders' laws, customs and creation spirits. We recognise these lands at QUT have always been places of teaching, learning and research. In particular, QUT likes to acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders play within the QUT community. So that's our context. So we're going to be talking about design thinking, but let's start first of all. So what is design? Well, I'm not a trained designer, although the colleagues I work with in the design lab are. So what I've distilled is an understanding of what design is. And so the definition I've come up with is it's purposeful behavior targeted towards certain goals and the generation of solutions. So as well as that, it's actually a whole mindset, an appreciative mindset in terms of what's happening. What are some of the positives of that? It's a consultative and a very inclusive perspective. And so realizing that while we all have our own perspectives, the richness comes from working with others. And this collaborative exploration, co-creation, both of our understanding of our ideas and in fact our rapid prototypes and going forward with implementation comes from the benefits of working with others. So this is what designers do on a regular basis. So if that's what designers do, how is that relevant to us? Well, I take Herb Simon, the Nobel laureate in economics, his view that we're all designing. Everyone who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones is a designer, or really is designing, and we can all learn to be better designers. And that's really the purpose of this introductory course on design thinking. So what is then this notion of design thinking? It's been popularized probably for the last couple of decades, really, by designers who really understand that while design is a very big church and takes very different perspectives, whether it's a graphic designer or an industrial designer or an interior designer, design thinking is about applying the designly ways of thinking and doing focused on a human-centered approach. So I want you to think design thinking is really human-centered design. And for example, Tim Brown, who was the CEO of a very well-known design company called IDEO, he suggests that thinking like a designer can help transform the way we develop products, services, processes, and even strategy. And so there's a lot of literature around this. So I want you to think design thinking is human-centered design. So then what's this whole notion of human-centered design? Well, it's really an approach to innovation that uses the designer's toolkit. It actually integrates the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, both of these are very dynamic areas, as well as the requirements for business success. And so here we have a picture of Tim Brown, who was the CEO of IDEO at the time. He describes the process as having a process of inspiration around a challenge or opportunity or a major problem, ideation in terms of coming up with lots of ideas, and of course, implementing, putting these ideas often through a prototyping process into practice. So human-centered design, integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. So I'm saying this in a different way here. Here we have 3 components again. Desirability, what is it that people desire? What's feasible in terms of what is technically and organisationally feasible, and then what's viable in terms of the organisation or the business going forward. They're the three major components. So where does design thinking fit in? Very much at that front end in terms of what do people find desirable. The challenge with finding out what they find desirable is often it's very difficult to articulate what it is that I really need. We tend to think we know, but it often isn't until we're presented with different choices that we actually get a much deeper understanding. And it's so much more difficult to find out what others see as important. What are their sources of pain and gain? So this is really where design thinking comes in. Now, Tim Brown also suggests that designers actually work in a particular way. They're very focused on empathy. They understand it's a people-first approach. We really need to start with who are the users? Who are the people who are hopefully the beneficiary of whatever it is we're doing? How do we imagine solutions that are inherently desirable, but how do we match them? By being informed by what the explicit needs of people are, as well as their latent needs. How do we integrate what our past, if you like, analytical skills that we've developed at this stages in our careers with other contradictory factors that maybe challenge those ideas? How do we actually maintain a perspective that says there's always at least one potential solution that's better than the existing alternative? So this whole optimistic outlook. An experimental mindset which says, look, maybe we really don't know yet, but if we try out some different things, if we have some particular questions and we take on board the constraints, then we might come up with some new ideas. So this experimental mindset, and always this collaboration, particularly building in people from different disciplines and work with people in other disciplines. We also have some of the research carried out by Mitch Lusky at Northumbria University. He examined what happens when designers work in organisation. He found some particular abilities and capabilities. Particularly, it's this immersion, trying to see the whole situation, a bit of a passion for bringing ideas to life. It's about making things happen. It's not about sitting back and letting the world happen to you. It's very much about saying, what are some of the risks here? And what are some of the parameters there? And how might we just stretch those boundaries a little? Capturing information using visual thinking, but also exploring all the senses. What does the people feel when they see this? When they do this, what's their experience? But you notice the last one, the ability to empathize with the human side of situations. That is crucial. And we'll be going forward with that one. Another way of looking at a design thinking mindset might be, and this comes from the D School, the design school mindset. This is what is a design thinking mindset. A focus on human values, showing and not telling, because often people switch off when you tell them things. If you show them, it's actually very powerful. Embracing this experimental approach, it's experimentation in terms of what if we try this, or what if we try that, or what if we combine things, or if we take something away. Being very mindful of a process in terms of where you're going with that. This bias towards action, making things happen, testing them out, radically collaborating with people from very different backgrounds, and really crafting what is it that we're trying to do here? Getting some of that definition and clarity. They're really important. Another way is to say, look, we really don't know what's happening here. And by saying that, that's really trying to close down some of our assumptions. Don't judge what's there already. Question everything. Why is this happening? Does it happen all the time? Is it only on certain days? Is it particular patterns? Be really curious to go beyond what looks like the situation. What are the patterns? When does it occur? How often? Are there some other factors that trigger it? And also really listen. So that's listening certainly with your ears, but also with your eyes. You're seeing what's happening when people are telling you things, what energizes them, what actually worries them. Really, really listen. That's really the beginner's mindset. So going forward from there, the other thing that designers do is they use a lot of visual thinking. And I think that's something probably we're not quite as used to doing. And that's one of the things I'd really like to see you develop in these modules, to capture ideas in a very simple visual way. And there's some useful work there from Dan Rome on the back of the napkin. This happens all the time when we're meeting with people, they're trying to tell you things. So you try to sketch out, so what's happening here? Try to capture that information. And there's a very short video there you might like to check out in your own time. So we've talked about a process of design thinking, and here we have 5 components. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And it looks like, if you're reading from left to right, it's a very linear process. In fact, it's just the opposite. So in fact, when we try to empathize and we actually find out the user needs, really drill down into that to understand what's happening there, we might come up with a definition. No, I haven't quite got it. We have to go back a few times as we get more and more information. Similarly, as we design what we think we're doing, we might carry out some ideation processes and generate lots of good ideas. And then that may tell us, look, we really maybe need to have a bit more information. So we may need to go back again. And actually, often prototyping comes later, but often that idea generation is something we carry out at many different stages. So I want you to think, while it looks like it's a linear process, in fact, sometimes when we get to the first prototype, we find it didn't quite capture a thing, we might have to go back to another ideation process. Or even when we get to the first lot of prototypes, we might try 2 or 3 and then think, as we test them, maybe we need more information. So I really want you to see it's not a linear process, it's just the opposite. It's very iterative and different processes are used at different times. Now, having said that, of course, when you're designing, sometimes it really feels, what am I doing? I'm sort of all over the place. I don't really know what I'm doing or where I am. That's why we need the clarity of focus and to define what it is we're trying to achieve. There's a very brief video here on what is design thinking. I'm going to suggest that you look at that. And that takes, as you see, a bit less than 2 minutes. It's actually, once again, from IDEO. It talks about that process of inspiration, ideation, and implementation. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. Let's stop sharing my screens briefly, so you have a chance. Okay, so I hope you saw what is design thinking. Very, I guess, quite useful summary of what we could think of as design thinking. So I'm going to go back to screen sharing again, just so we can continue with where we're at. Okay. The other characteristic of designers is, with this, remember we talked about a design mindset, about being open to new ideas, open to what's possible, open to what people are telling us, as well as what we're learning. Being very curious and asking questions, but also being quite optimistic that we're going to come up with some good solutions. The processes that happen there is very much a divergence. So we capture new ideas, lots and lots of new ideas and lots of information, but then we have to converge and say, okay, what are the themes here? What's the important things? If we had to get all this information, we do, because it gives us a rich understanding, but we also need to find a way forward. So a lot of the design thinking process is this divergent, convergent. Not just once, it happens in every area, both in terms of collecting information, converging to finalize what is really important here and really to define where it is we're going forward. Ideate, of course, we're diverging, coming up with ideas. And then with those ideas, from that converging, we're going to rapidly prototype some of those ideas and test them with our users. So this is probably one of the most well-known models of design thinking. It comes from the Stanford D School. It's now called the Hasso-Plattner D School. It was actually purchased by a German billionaire who was so impressed with the whole benefits of design thinking in multiple contexts. He actually invested his money in terms of saying, this really needs to go forward. How can we carry this further? So looking at the 5 steps, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. See, once again, we're starting with where the people are. What are the user needs? And really, we understand that's a challenge. And in the next module, you'll be looking at that in a lot more detail, both the empathize and define. The third module, you'll be looking at very much the ideate, and then prototyping is actually a module in itself, prototyping and testing, and then we'll be bringing it together in the final module 5. So I want you to be familiar with this model, because this is the one we're going to be following through. There is another well-known model. In fact, there's another even more, but let's keep it simple. This is called the double diamond, very much used in Europe and in the UK. So once again, it's diverge, converge, converge, and really it's using the Ds. So it's discover, define, develop, deliver. And then of course it evolves. And you may go right back to, as you get more information, discover, define, develop, deliver. So I really want you to think of this diverge, converge process. And one of the nice things about this slide, it also has some suggestions about some of the processes you might use to immerse yourself to discover that information. You may use interviews, you may do user experience observations where you ask people if you can follow them around or actually work with them in terms of what does a day in your life look like. Define really what's core here. What are the insights? What do we learn from these things? Brainstorming, of course, is the ideation, and then delivering in terms of a rapid prototype to test with users. So going back to this one that I said we're going to be using in these 5 modules, remember, empathize, learn about your audience. Who are the users? What are their needs? How do we define what it is we're trying to do? Ideate, brainstorm, of course, is probably the most well-known one, brainstorming, brain writing, but you might also look at what are the wildest ideas and the other variations. Prototyping, building some tangible representation of one or more ideas to actually present back to people. And sometimes it's a combination of other really good ideas. And once again, testing, gaining that user feedback and saying, okay, where are we at now? Have we got nearly out where we need to be, or do we need to have to go again? More ideas, more prototyping, more testing. So why introduce design thinking into a health context? Well, there are many reasons. One is the health-centered challenges that really people bring us, particularly in a health context. It's a time of often great uncertainty and great worry for them. It's a challenging environment where people often are out of their comfort zones. They're not really sure what's happening to them, to their families. And also, this is a very foreign environment. Another reason is there are excellent examples of how design thinking has improved healthcare, and you'll really look forward to looking to those. But also this generating of new solutions. This is something we have to keep doing. The world doesn't stand still, and neither do people. So I guess to summarize where we've been, I really want you to understand that design thinking is very much a team sport. It's a very collaborative process. It's also very engaging. It's actually a lot of fun, but it also generates positive feelings towards your colleagues, your team, and often people you may not be used to working with, and particularly involving users is very important. It's a very rich way of generating ideas, of coming up with some rapid prototypes and testing those ideas in that audience. It's a lot of fun, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So summarizing then, what is this design thinking? Well, it's a systematic approach to problem identification and problem solving. So what would be different if clinicians thought and acted more like designers? Well, their problem solving wouldn't be about jumping into action straight away, which often is the challenge that my students have, I must say. It would be driven by 3 core beliefs about empathy, establishing a deep understanding of human needs, imagination, ideation, coming up with some new possibilities, iterating them. You might have to keep working on them for a while and testing them. And really, the first solutions are only stepping stones to even better ones. So, thinking back, how might you explain design thinking to a friend or a colleague? Will you emphasize the human-centered focus on users' needs, the design mindset? Design thinking is collaborative design doing. Really, design thinking as a term is actually a bit of a misnomer. It's very much about experiencing design, the structured but iterative process, or the rapid prototyping of ideas into tangible scenarios or artifacts that are then tested. Getting started, you'll be looking at more of these future modules, but I suggest that you also have a look on the internet, explore ideo.com and ideo.org, many rich case studies there, as well as how do we build confidence in our own creativity. And there's a very nice video there on building our creative confidence. So there are a number of resources here. One is recognizing that we have often the technical skills and knowledge. It's often how do we build in the human factors and taking that further. And the IDEO human-centered design I mentioned before. There's also quite a number of readings that I think you'll find useful. So I'm hoping that's given you some introduction to what we might be looking at in these 5 modules. I'm going to stop sharing my screen briefly. Very much looking forward to meeting you again in future modules. You'll be meeting other colleagues in my team. Natalie Wright will be looking at empathy and define and ideate as well. And I'm pretty sure Evonne will be looking at rapid prototyping and testing. Thank you very much. Looking forward to meeting you again in the future. Have fun exploring and experimenting with design thinking.